Hello, Adrian here, just introing this week's episode 232 of the podcast. And Renaud's been reading a book this week, and he's going to go through that with you. The book's called Arriving Today, From Factory to Front Door, Why Everything Has Changed About How and What We Buy. And that's by Christopher Mims, who is a Wall Street Journal journalist. And in the book, he explores the complicated global supply chains that are in place to bring products from factories in places like China or other places in Asia to your doorstep. So the book talks about the technology in use and how that's advanced over time, labor used, logistical challenges, automation, and all sorts of other important points regarding this kind of global supply chain. And Renaud's going to be talking in particular about the macroeconomic and macro-social effects of automation from the book. So let's let Renaud get into it, and you can see if this book is for you as well. You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group.
Over the weekend, I was reading a book that contains a few interesting insights, I would say, about automation and the effects of process automation. So that book, the title is Arriving Today. I think it's a bestseller book that was written by Christopher Mims in 2021. That's a journalist of the Wall Street Journal. And the subheader says, From Factory to Front Door, Why Everything Has Changed and about how and what we buy. Okay. So it starts with a random product that goes from the factory to the port and then gets loaded into a container ship, etc., etc. And what I found interesting is what they say about the Amazon fulfillment centers. And of course, as one would expect, there's a lot of talk about how workers in warehouses or whatever. Basically, first I should mention fulfillment center. What does that mean? In a Walmart, they have warehouses that receive goods sort of on pallets or let's say in bulk at least, and then maybe it's cross-docked from one truck to the other, etc. They do a lot of things to keep it very efficient, but they don't fulfill the orders from these warehouses, right? So it's still regional distribution centers and things like that redirect things as needed to different stores within the region, right? But customers still go to the store, and that's where their orders are fulfilled. Same thing with a Costco, for example, which are basically big warehouses where customers come and they pick the products themselves. Okay, so that's still sort of customer self-fulfillment. Whereas Amazon has to fulfill the orders themselves, right? Without a store in most cases, of course. They have purchased, what is it called? The Whole Foods chain, and they've been trying different things with certain categories. Okay. But predominantly everything is e-commerce fulfilled from some kind of logistics. All right. So what happens over there is basically opening packages, sorting things, keeping them in store, and then when it's ready to be fulfilled for an order, then it comes together and maybe there's 2, 3, 4 things, different products that go into the same little carton or big carton that is then sent to an individual customer's home typically. Okay. So what happens is you have people who actually need to get these different items, put them in the package. There's labeling, closing the package, sending it in a certain way, etc. Okay. So it is a little bit closer to typical manufacturing work where people actually touch the product and make changes to the products, right? They put the big carton, they just pick the units one by one, they label them, they repack them, right? It's very, one could say it's very simple manufacturing. And that's where it becomes interesting, because Amazon over the years have really tried a lot of things, and he is going in a sort of an seemingly extreme direction. Okay. And I will talk about that. But first, before I go too deep into that, there's been a lot of articles about how people at Amazon fulfillment centers and their other like sortation hubs, etc., are treated really bad. They are managed by an algorithm, etc. Okay. First, this is a $15 an hour kind of work. Okay. They are paid $15 an hour. At least they were at the time of the book, like 3 years ago. So I guess it hasn't changed much. That's an entry level job. People don't need to be skilled. Actually, there's been a lot of efforts to de-skill the work so that sort of anybody who can use their hands and legs and everything relatively fast can do the job. Then, of course, they also need to be fast and precise and accurate, right? That's the problem. There's a lot of pressure on them. But really, what's the big deal if you compare it with warehouse workers, the way they are pressured in a Walmart and in a lot of other low cost retailers, I, there are problems. It's just inherent endemic to that kind of work in that industry, I think. So anyway, we are not going to hear people say, "Oh, such a nice job," and so on, right? It's not going to happen. So of course, there's a lot of complaints, but let's actually look at what Amazon has done that is really, as I mentioned, going into a very, very specific direction. So I don't know when that was, but Amazon, maybe 10, 15 years ago, purchased a company that had developed, let's say, robotic systems. It's a little bit, I don't like to say robotic systems. It's automated guided vehicles that were, and together with a system, right? It was not just the AGVs zipping around, but an entire system for automating some warehouse operations. Okay. Not just like robot arms moving and grabbing things and things like that. And they kept working at it and making it more and more and more advanced for their own needs. Okay. It's Kiva, Kiva, Kiva system. That was the name of that company. All right. So in a low automation or let's say a no automation warehouse, what happens is that the workers say, okay, I need to go grab that item. And then they see in the IT system, oh, it's a location, whatever, K3. Okay, I need to go over there and see, okay, and match is the right SKU, the right item. Okay, I need to make sure there's no mistake. So maybe there's mistake proofing by scanning the barcode, getting the confirmation, etc. They grab it, then they go grab the next item, the next item, the next item. Okay, that's the way it happens in our warehouse. I mean, that's the way it's been done for a long time, and it's still done in most warehouses, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so there's a lot of walking around and searching and confirming this is all right and so on. So what Kiva allows the warehouse to do is actually the system knows, okay, there's been a sale of this item and this item and this item, etc. Okay, and and this they have to be packed together because they will be sent in the same package. Okay, and so they send their automated guided vehicles or whatever they call it to actually grab, okay, one piece of that SKU and one piece of this one and two pieces of this one and bring it to the worker. Okay, so it's not replacing the workers actually grabbing the things, maybe applying a label on it, putting them together in the carton box and things like that, right? But they're replacing a lot of the walking around and some of the grabbing and putting in a bin and putting in another bin, etc. So it does make the workers more efficient, more productive. One worker can do a lot more packaging and shipping in one day. And in the book, they say it in an interesting way. They say, okay, I'm going to quote, a worker using the Kiva system in its early incarnations would typically triple their output, say from an average of 100 pieces an hour to 300, says Mick, okay, the person who was interviewed. But it wasn't as if the Kiva using companies then reduced sort of their warehouse employees' hours to a third of what they once were while paying them the same wage. Instead, Staples and Walgreens, so these are early employees, early customers of Kiva. So instead, Staples and Walgreens leveraged their workers' increased product, shortened the amount of time required to fulfill an order, and ultimately either lower the cost of their services, increase their profits, or both, etc., etc. Okay, so basically, the idea here is that you have automated systems that remove the need for people to walk around. They go grab the things, they bring them to the workers. So the workers can do a lot more, as I mentioned, packing and shipping. And what happens is that the cost of fulfilling goes down. In the same warehouse with the same number of square feet, can ship out a lot more product. So actually, what happens in a lot of cases is that in the same warehouse, you would actually have more people. And they would be very focused on, again, doing the things that the automated system is not good at doing, right? Grabbing this exactly like this and grabbing this one like this and putting them together like this, etc. So that's sort of the last jobs for humans in these logistics hubs. So there are two implications of this. I'm going to go through them one by one. One is the implication on the economy as a whole, and on basically on the use of automation, the role of automation, how automation goes up and how it impacts employment, salaries, etc. And the other one is on the type of work, right, with a lot more injuries and so on and so forth. So let's look at the first one, the implications on the economy and labor productivity and so on. So I'm going back to the book, and the author mentions the British economist John Maynard Keynes, who predicted that by 2028, everyone will be working about 3 hours a day, right? Because as things get more automated, people will have a lot more time for leisure. And then the author says, well, obviously that hasn't happened. On average, Americans work 6.5 hours a day of paid work, plus women have to do unpaid domestic labor, etc., etc. So we're not there. That hasn't happened. So the question is, how come? What's going on? Because obviously there's a lot more automation everywhere than 100 years ago, right? So I'm going to quote a paragraph from the book. Okay. So the author says, what Keynes got wrong is what lots of people get wrong about the relationship between new technologies, increased productivity, and jobs. New technologies don't eliminate jobs. As living standards rise, humans find new ways to consume more. Just as important, every time we automate a task, we tend to use more of that product or service in combination with others to accomplish some other more complicated or difficult end. Consider, for example, how telephone switchboard operators were replaced with circuits, without which we could not have the internet. Well, that's a pretty good example. And obviously, we know that a lot of things were launched because of the opportunity of the internet, right? Starting with Amazon and Google and so many other. And The problem, of course, is that these people, like the telephone switchboard operators, well, they lose their jobs, right? And we see a lot of a lot of candidates for the same fate with AI, with a lot of startups working, for example, on a self-driving vehicle. Or what's going to happen to taxi drivers, bus drivers, truckers, etc., etc.? At one point, will they just be out of a job, or will it just be augmenting their capabilities? Maybe a little bit of both, depending in the medium term or in the long term. Anyway, that's a pretty important question, I think. Now I'm going back to the book. I'm going to quote another paragraph. Every time there is a recession or a global pandemic and people are forced to change their ways or switch to a cheaper and better alternative, the process of disruption goes into overdrive. The result is that the demand for new goods and services goes up, at the same time that humans suitable for providing them are looking for jobs. And some innovative new companies, such as Amazon, figures out how to meet that shift in demand by scooping up all those underutilized workers. So, and of course, if we think of the COVID pandemic and the big boost that it gave e-commerce and all the brick and mortar shops that had to close their doors, that's an example. But there's sort of shocks and situations that push people to actually switch to the new, let's say, new solutions that are allowed by technical progress, right? Now, does it mean that, let's say, improvements in automation directly lead to a loss of jobs? No, there's several examples of the opposite, right? And one of them is Amazon. Well, since there's less walking around needed, actually, some of the warehouses have to employ more people because the inventory keeps flying around at a faster and faster and faster pace. So you still need a lot of people to do what automation cannot do, right? That's really, it's really true at Amazon, it seems. They say the fulfillment centers that have robots often have higher employment numbers, right? So more robots, but also more humans. And of course, the output from these warehouses, from these fulfillment centers, in this case, is much higher, right? Now, what is the output of all the total of all the fulfillment centers for Amazon? Let's say with the same number of packages to send in a year, it's probably lower, right? But that's just looking at one thing. Another interesting example is, I'm going to quote again, historians broadly agree that before Hilly Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, and here we're talking in the probably 18th century, slavery was on its way out in the United States, but the combined appetites of an automated gin and England's rapidly industrializing spinning and weaving industries created a huge demand for enslaved persons and made their continued abuse and bondage an enormously profitable enterprise for white Southerners. So that's pretty sad. But in this case, actually led for more demand for unskilled labor. And the last point here is that the author is thinking, well, it's a $15 an hour job for an entry-level job, right? You don't need a college degree. You don't need any special training, actually. All right. Just need to be in relatively good health. So it's not bad if you compare it with other entry-level jobs, but he says, well, this has kind of replaced manufacturing jobs, which have gone overseas in part because of low-cost retailers that sort of help drive this shift, right? They did not exactly drive this shift, but they helped drive it, okay? So he says, well, maybe you had a unionized $40 an hour job in a manufacturing facility. And then they went maybe to China or Mexico or wherever. And then you have a lot of employment in that area. And Amazon has made special efforts to set up their logistical hubs in areas with relatively high unemployment so that they could easily find a lot of people willing to work, right? Including in a job that's maybe not not a great job. All right. So the author says, well, if you look at it that way, not great, right? It's not really a win for the economy. And it's kind of hard to argue against that. Now, as I mentioned, there's two topics I wanted to cover. And the second one, which I'm coming to, is about the impact on the employees' health and sort of the job relations and so on. There's been a lot of articles about that. So yeah, people basically have to work to the pace that is set by an algorithm. So there's no direct conflict with management, at least not the managers that they that they see in the warehouses, in the fulfillment centers and so on. Like everybody can be very friendly, but you got to make pace. If you cannot catch up with the pace that the algorithm tells you is the one, is sort of your target, your minimum rate of work, you're going to be retrained, whatever. And then at one point, you're just going to lose the job. Okay. So the other, says, well, maybe this should be what we call surveillance capitalism, etc., etc. Okay. What strikes me is that this is sort of the way some German companies implemented lean. And it's not just German companies, of course, but sort of a cliche here, where you have the industrial engineers in their offices and, of course, getting down to the shop floor to study things, who are very smart and will devise, okay, this is a better system. And this is the set of rules, and you have to follow the rule, and that's it. You just have to do it, right? And in China, I've seen a lot of that, okay, which is extremely different from the Toyota production system sort of approach, where there's an enormous amount of effort on getting the frontline people, getting the team members on the shop floor to actually spend a bit of time, thinking of better ways. Of course, it's not all from the team members, right? It's from the team leader and from the different people in the hierarchy. There's actually a lot of different layers in the Toyota production system because there's a lot of hours devoted to providing training and doing some Kaizen exercises, etc., etc. So there's really a very conscious effort to hire more than needed and have some extra capacity and use that extra capacity not to work on the daily grind of what we have to ship, but to also work on, hey, let's try something new. Let's work on improvements, etc., etc. Right? And that leads to a very different atmosphere and very different culture, where it's more bottom up. It's not that top down. Okay. Of course, it's not all bottom up. Of course, we should not go with stereotypes too much here. But Amazon strikes me as a very, very top down culture, and people go in and they're just hired for their pair of eyes and pair of hands, and basically that's it. They clock in their hours, they make their rate, they get their pay, and that's it. Okay. So that it's kind of hard for me to accept that people say this is like a manufacturing job. And this is like a job in a bad factory, yeah. Okay, let's say it this way. Now, looking at the injury. So people say there's a lot of focus on safety training, blah, blah, blah. But then when you're on the job, basically you cannot make the rate if you follow all of the safety precautions that they actually give you in training, right? So this strikes me as BS. And, well, we tell you to do that, and then, whatever. But at the end of the day, you make your numbers or you're out, right? So safety obviously is not their number one objective. Okay, I mean, as long as they are, they are honest about it, that's fine. But there's a little bit of cover my behind here with all the safety talk. But that's one thing. As the author pointed out, it seems like injury rates are actually higher in facilities that are more highly automated. So more automation, as I said, means people don't have to walk so much, people don't have to do so many things. And basically, the automated system will do everything that it can do well and fast, right? More economically than with a human. So in the end, what does that mean? That means the humans still have 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of tasks to do. And they have to do, remember, very fast. So here we are talking about a short cycle of work. I do this for 1, 2 seconds, and then I go something else 1, 2, 3 seconds. And I have to do it very fast. It's extremely repetitive. So when you have something with short cycles, very repetitive kind of work, done under pressure, that definitely is going to lead to injuries, right? Some people say that in the how to say, the work standards, because that's the way they call it. Okay, work standards that Amazon follows, not a lot of attention is given to ergonomics. And that's really, to me, that's a really big red flag. Really, safety is not one of their priorities. And really what I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, okay, how, is this going to go away? Well, unless the engineers who think of how the work is actually done pay a lot of attention to ergonomics, and unless the workers are given a chance to avoid doing high pressure, short cycle type of tasks, well, the injury rate will keep being relatively high, and is just going to get worse and worse as the automated systems become capable of of performing more tasks. So the humans are just doing whatever the robots and so on cannot do or cannot do well, right? So it's going to be more and more concentrated on a few tasks that are going to be more and more repetitive. And that's what I kind of worry about. And what could Amazon or and other e-commerce companies do? Should they do a bit more like McDonald's, have people do it maybe as a part-time basis, not 35, 40 hours a week? Should they, I don't know, should they limit it to maybe 2 hours a week? Should they mix in more, a higher mix of tasks so that people don't do so much repetitive work? Would it be sufficient to work on much more ergonomic work process design? I don't know. Should the heavier packages be handled differently? I don't know. I should go there and actually observe and talk to people and so on. I can only imagine and wonder. But really, I think we're going to hear of that more and more over the next few years. And basically, that's it for today. We'll link to the book in the show notes. So the book again is entitled Arriving Today by a Wall Street Journal technology columnist. Okay, and you can find it is from HarperCollins, and of course you can buy it from Amazon and other places. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks a lot, and you will hear from us next week as usual.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. visit us at sofeast.com. That's SOFEAST.com to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.